We do have a 10-minute Q&A on the agenda now, so if Andrew and Martin would like to sit up with John, you may even have a name card somewhere. If not, don't worry. We'll take some questions from the floor. If not, I'll see what I can come up with for them. But there are mics around, so put your hand up if you've got a question. The mics will come around to you. There's a mic. There's a mic.
You said earlier there's the eyeball networks then attract content providers. That suggests there's a kind of chicken and egg dimension to this. How does an exchange start up? Who's there first? How does it grow?
Yeah, it may well actually sound like a chicken and egg problem. It isn't. And the reason it isn't is because the model works and has worked all over the world. And therefore, by default, you aren't going out, whether you're soliciting content networks or eyeball networks, you're not going out there saying, well, if you come, then maybe something else will happen. It isn't that complicated. It turns out that this is good for both, and both will actively pursue an interconnect that localizes traffic. There is no bias. There is no bias either way. It's not like hosters come first or content or eyeballs come first. It's pretty equal, and we've seen this everywhere around the world, everywhere.
It is a mutual two-way thing. I don't see the eyeball networks or the content networks having the upper hand really on either side. It's about a peering exchange. It's about they've both got a problem. They've both got to shift that traffic, and the eyeball side are seeing dramatic increase in traffic, and so are the content guys like Netflix.
If I could just come in briefly, I mean, I think what Andrew and Martin said is absolutely right. I'm confident we can solve that issue here in Scotland. It has to be said, though, that one of the problems, we're here in 2013 talking about a startup, and the sad fact is that lots of network engineering work has been done to take advantage of the status quo, and the status quo is very London orientated. But I'm going to speak a bit more about that when I get a chance in the second session, so I probably should just keep it as simple as that for the time being. But it is definitely a good question.
I'm not sure I really understand the geographical economics of what you're saying, in the sense that if I came from the Western Isles, would there be an argument for a peering point in Stornoway? And if I came from somewhere in Fair Isle, presumably there has to be some point where it makes sense to have peering, and some point where it's daft. The map in Africa looked very thin. Bits of the US, it seemed to be quite long transits between the peering points, and they don't seem to be that regional. So, what's the point for Scotland? Is it the right point?
Let me answer that one as well, because again, I'm going to try and pick that point up, because there's a critical economic issue underlying all of that. To give you heart, there are internet exchanges in places like Iceland, and it's an enormous geographical problem, and Iceland has a population much, much tinier than just Edinburgh. There's an internet exchange in Malta, and the entire population of Malta is a fraction of the size of Edinburgh. So
there's a geographical argument there.
Yes,
if you to transit from Iceland to London, it would be
it doesn't really. The key issue is not how far away they are from other places. The key issue is whether, in fact, there's a local community of network operators where it makes sense for that traffic to get exchanged. And generally speaking, wherever there is civilization, at some point or another, there is going to be a case for building a local internet exchange. I think, again, reflecting on the fact that we're in 2013 and here we are talking about Scotland as a whole, and it's a big country in its own right. More than 5 million people, well, I think is to some extent we're living with the past, we're living with things that have already gone on. But I think the case for doing something in Scotland as a whole is undeniable. If you were to then say the Western Isles or some of the outer reaches, if you like, of Scotland, then the case does get more difficult. But what's working for us is inexorably, and Martin said this, traffic is up and to the right. You know, traffic is growing, consumption of traffic is growing, proliferation of content providers is working for us. And as all those things kick in, it makes it easier to make a case to build an exchange, whereas if we'd tried to do this 10 years ago, say, we would have found the case harder to make.
The economics, there's two parts to this, and I'll tell you an old story that will point this out as well. Andrew said it was 10 to 16 milliseconds between here and London. That's a fairly small amount of time. I don't think I can click my fingers quick enough to show you what 10 milliseconds feels like. But get on a train, go to London, overnight or not, and then come back. Ignore the time. Think of the distance. Fair amount of fiber buried in the ground, and that fiber costs per mile an amount. The telecom business is in the game of selling that connectivity, and that's fine. Any amount of traffic that flows from Edinburgh or from Scotland to London and back again has a cost associated with it. And at some point, that cost will become more efficient to localize as opposed to send far away. If you take the story back to prior to the London Internet Exchange days and go back to what the internet looked like, maybe a little bit pre-commercial to a certain extent, but there in the early 90s, you had most of the traffic flowing across the Atlantic at then great cost. Of course, there wasn't very much traffic. And back again. The localization made sense very quickly because of the cost structure being dramatic. It's possible that the cost is part of the formula that gets put into place, which is why you look at smaller exchanges taking longer to take off. We can look at this in a couple of different ways. Now, you mentioned something that I think is key. The US looks void of internet exchanges, yet it's a very big place. Do not take a train, by the way, across the US. It'll take forever, and it's an atrocious service. The US actually does have quite a few more exchanges than I placed on the map, but in whole, it's a very cost-effective place to move bits around. So when you worry about 10 milliseconds to 16 milliseconds, and with the topic of discussion here, and the reality is that you can easily do that between Denver and the Bay Area, which actually may be 20 milliseconds, et cetera, et cetera. So you end up with a different scale of a different problem. But that up and to the right graph of more traffic simply means that after a while, somebody says, we need an internet exchange at Salt Lake City, approximately halfway between Denver and the Bay Area. We need an exchange in Columbus. We need an exchange in Atlanta, which didn't exist 10 years ago, but does now and is very, very successful. All of those, and I'm not going to use the word secondary city, but all of those intermediary locations or edge locations come into their own, both as traffic increases and as the amount of local players increase as well. So I don't think, without going through specific numbers, the story is no different here than what we have seen at scale in other locations around the world.
Just to come back to the Western Isles question, if you like, and at what size does an internet exchange become viable in terms of looking at Scotland? You're saying should there be smaller internet exchanges, much more local places? I think you need to look there's a pragmatic question here. You need to look at where are the data centers, where are the carrier networks and the ISPs in the same geographic location, and where have those people got their routers. And that pretty much at the moment would come down to Edinburgh, Glasgow, and maybe Dundee and Aberdeen. You're only going to get an internet exchange where they can interconnect together. And I think we're at a stage now where Scotland has enough of these providers that we could do this for Scotland, but I don't think it's going to make any sense. It's not going to be practical to do it in smaller towns or even smaller cities in the near future. Anyway. And you don't really see that happening around the world in other countries either.
No, you don't.
My name's Graham Gordon. I'm the CEO of a company called IFB. So we're a LINX member and have been for some time. And like some of the other people in the room, we're a connectivity carrier provider. We push bandwidth and data around. We're building new data centers all the time. But actually, through LINX, we see ourselves pushing very little traffic back into the Scottish market, back into our competitors at times and our partners and colleagues within the Scottish marketplace, both at a carrier and a content level. And surely that's a critical mass that we should be looking at. I know we're kicking the football around about broadband within the country just now, which is a bit of a nonsense and a misdemeanour and should be separated from this, actually. But it's critical mass just now that Iceland, I agree what you're saying about Iceland, has an internet exchange, but it's got a transatlantic cable hitting there, so there's a lot of purpose in building data centres there, so one ties into the other. And somebody mentioned early on, have we missed the boat because it's hit Manchester? But realistically and commercially and economically, we don't see the benefit as an ISP with 1,100 business customers, 200,000 end users, in the traffic that we would return or retain in Scotland right now to our business model. There's no economic advantage for us and therefore none for our clients, so we can't reduce our operating costs and pass that on to our clients. And that would be my challenge back into this discussion. If it works and it's commercially viable, we're in. We'll sign up. We've already proven that we'll do that in London. If there's an alternative that gives us connectivity from Scotland to the rest of the world, gives us more resilience, one of the points that's in there, and improved latency, we're in as well. But that case doesn't seem to be being made because it's in isolation to global international infrastructure rather than just in-country looking at our fleet infrastructure. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, and I'm gonna repeat one of the comments that I made. Major telecom companies or even localized telecom companies will take the existence of an internet exchange as a very strong indicator that there's the potential of business that needs to have independent infrastructure built. London is by far the absolute hub of telecom in and out of the UK. I know that, and your comment is true. But one of the things about this business, and one of the things that we've seen in other places around the world, is until you actually build and start interconnecting inside a localized environment, you won't pull traffic away and see the benefits. The example that comes to mind, and again, I'm sorry, it's a very US-centric example, but it's a simple 3-hour drive from Vancouver, Canada, down to Seattle. And Seattle has a very, very successful internet exchange operator. It has it's membership-based, very similar to the LINX in that sense. It has a very solid telecom infrastructure, easy interconnect within data centers, et cetera, et cetera. And Vancouver was always the poor stepchild to this. Everybody in Canada went down to Seattle because that's where things were. And it has taken up until the last 2 years the re-emergence of the internet exchange there, fixing some of the co-location capabilities there, cross connects, and now has built itself into an independent location, which now is seeing infrastructure being built in independent of Seattle. So you are absolutely right that outside, I think, of the Faroes cable, and I don't know, where does Far Ice land here?
It does.
It lands here, but I don't know where.
Thursday.
Okay.
No, Banff is not Far Ice. Far Ice lands at Castletown in Thursday.
By John O'Groats.
Okay, right. No. Most of the time, yes. So you read my mind. Where a cable lands and where it terminates are two different things. However, the impetus to cut that cable and to terminate it somewhere diverse will come about when the marketplace. This is the chicken and egg. The chicken and egg question asked earlier was about content and eyeballs. There is a different chicken and egg when you start talking about telecom. And clearly, we've seen the internet exchange growth as being a push to make that happen. Because otherwise it's a blank piece of paper.
I take I take the challenge. You've actually already given 2 reasons why you would join if we started an exchange anyway. So fine, you're signed up. But let's make the bigger case.